I'm one of the judges in this year's Indie Cup Ukraine 2024 Critics' Choice Award. 63 games were submitted into the showcase, and I had the privilege and honour to be able to look at behind-the-scenes footage of games that are in early development. Some of them aren't really even announced yet, just to kind of see exactly what's bubbling up in the world of Ukraine game development. Of those, I then shortlisted 12, and so did all of the other judges, and they're all scored so that the top 10 then move forward to stage 2, where we get to play the demos, submit tailored feedback, and score them to see who wins the Critics' Choice Award. So I wanted to go through the 10 demos that I played, show you a little bit about them and what my initial thoughts were, to see whether any of you quite fancied a look at these too, and potentially wishlist them if you can. The first game I got to play was Signal Uncharted Lands, and this is a visual novel in a post-apocalyptic world where you play as a collective of 4 dogs going off on an expedition because largely human society has died. Dogs have survived, but they are now very bored of having a limited food supply and not very much to do. And so these 4 dogs all set off in the hope of being able to find like a fabled sausage tree is basically what the demo sorts it out to be, but with allusions to much grander adventures as you go along. I really loved the humour of this game. I thought the artwork was cool and colourful and much jollier than a post-apocalyptic game should be. And I really liked the idea that there was lots of pop culture references in this game. There's a hilarious part where it starts going, Jason, from a certain traumatic game from Quantic Dreams, if you've played that. But also, as you progress through the game, your choices affect the morale of the group. And so I'm assuming that then leads you to certain endings or certain nuances in the story. And it certainly alludes to that it would. But keeping an eye on that morale meter was really what was keeping me partly going alongside the really interesting story. I found this engrossing. Thumbs up from me. Signal Uncharted Lands. A visual novel about post-apocalyptic doggos. What's not to love? Next up is a game called Cat Tree, and of all the 10 demos, this was the one that didn't click with me the most. The idea behind this is that you just have a tree where cats land on it, from stalks I guess, and then they grow from kitten to adult cat, and as they do they generate cash. You can then choose, once the cat reaches full maturity, to sell it off for some dosh, then use that dosh to buy in more cats, or secateurs to cut off various bits of foliage from other tree branches, so you can have more cats on the go at once. There wasn't really anything beyond this gameplay loop though, and so the demo felt like an almost full experience on its own, and it didn't really engage me in the same way that quite a lot of idle clicker games don't really engage me either. However, if you're a fan of cute cats doing things that are cute, then that may be enough for you, and Cat Tree could well be a game for you. It just wasn't for me. The next game on this list is Shine On My Little Sun, and this is a gorgeous visual novel that kind of straddles between visual novel and point and click, because each scene has lots of things that you can click into and various different dialogue choices, and depending on how you act starts steering you down various different endings is what the developer is alluding to. I really like the story behind this too. You play as literally the sun that has fallen out of the sky, but is now in human form, being trapped inside a lantern for a while, and the world has kind of gone dark. And so as you start wandering around the town as Vargo, you start to hear of other people's ancient stories and how you interact with them decides whether or not you start to give the world a bit more hope, for example, that actually the sun will rise again. Beautiful artwork, gorgeous, mysterious and celestial soundtrack as well. This has aesthetics bang on point and a fantastic mystical allegorical story to match. So really, really loved Shine On My Little Sun. It's definitely a double thumbs up for me. Next up is a game called Missi, which is a pre-alpha point-and-click adventure. So we only had a really tiny slice of this game, but it was gorgeous whilst it was playing. You are a tiny little mouse in a watercolour hand-painted world doing point-and-click adventure-y things. And it was very much in the guise of click lots of things, see what you collect and where you can drop them off, and see what that then triggers and allows you to do afterwards. There was quite a lot of logic to the puzzles in the 2-screen slice of game that we were able to play. But I did find that I was having lots of technical issues trying to get it to run. Now, obviously, this is a pre-alpha, so you take that with the biggest pinch of salt you possibly can. But it's one of those things where Missi really hangs a carrot of what a good cozy point and click adventure would look like in this guise, but it was also very tiny, and so it's quite difficult to judge it up against other more substantial demos where I got to really feel out the mechanics. Keeping in the animal theme, next one up is Tailgate, and this game reminds me heavily of A Dog's Life on PS2, but with an added investigative mystery of where the hell have all the humans gone. You play as an adorable Labrador retriever, love that breed, wandering around the streets trying to work out what's gone on with your humans, interacting with other different dogs who all seem to have got personalities taken from various mafia films, which made me laugh. And then you would dive from a third-person perspective adventure to a first person's perspective sniffathon, trying to sniff out various clues of where your human has gone, or sniffing out when you go to different objects who's touched that and where that's come from and where it's going, for example, to try and solve various different puzzles. Mechanically, this game is definitely rough around the edges, but it is in its alpha state, so there's lots of work to be done in that area to smooth things out. But what I really liked here is the intersection of mystery and intrigue with playful mid-2000s adventure platforming, and that's a thumbs up for me. Next up is a game called Back to Hearth, and this is a narrative-focused exploration game which sees you returning back to your forest village home that has been destroyed by the calamity, and so have all of your neighbours escaped and left the town for dead. As you go around putting things back together again, unlike many other crafting or farming type games, which this game technically isn't, but it has the same cosy feel to it, you, instead of pressing a button or button mashing or pressing and holding something, have to do the various actions vaguely of what you're doing by pressing and holding your mouse and completing various symbols. So if you're spinning and turning something around, it will be like a spiral. If you're putting together some window panes or something, it's almost like you're putting across wooden panels and then hammering them in, and it just made the game so much more engaging rather than like a hands-off, almost blindly numbing pressing and holding a button to do not very much. I also really like the fact that this game alludes to, as you fix the world around you, more and more of your neighbours will start coming back in again, and there seemed to be some deep narrative lore that was being referenced towards the end of the demo, and the demo ended at exactly the right point where I was like, I want more. And so definitely a thumbs up from me, particularly if you like narrative focused just exploration games where I don't think you could die. It's just simply completing tasks, but way more engaging than a standard walking simulator. The next game on this list was probably my favourite of the 10, and it's Awita Journey of Hope. This is a side-scrolling 2D Metroidvania game that sees you playing as a young girl who wants to rescue a village, continuing theme here, but the village is in an epidemic, so she's going off to find a cure. The idea behind this is that obviously with most Metroidvanias, you start off with very few mechanics. And so during the course of the demo, you gain a double jump and then a double jump and a dash, which enabled you to really open up the different parts of the world and where you could get to. But it also had a very deliberate style for combat too, where only a few hits from some of the enemies would absolutely devastate you. And so you needed to be really careful and precise with the timing of your attacks, but also your rhythmic approach to your shield and blocking. your shield can only stay up for about a second max. And so if you don't time it with the actions of your enemies, you'll get absolutely slaughtered. And it took me a little while to get used to it, but then it just clicked and I found myself not being quite so gung-ho and having to be much more reserved and then taking my chances. Am I saying this is a Dark Souls style game? No, but it definitely takes some inspiration, I would say, from the way how you have to be very deliberate with that combat. Awita does the same thing. I found this utterly entrancing, straight on my wish list, as with a few of these games, but this is definitely probably the day one buy that I'll be getting. The next game on this list is Delusion Out of Space, and it is a sci-fi first-person shooter, but it spent just as much time on the exploration side of things. The key here, though, is about the game's atmosphere, which I thought was absolutely superb. It felt a little bit like I was in an Alien game to some degree, with its isolated spacecraft world, sirens off in the distance, weird creepy things going around in the background, and some odd mini games where you have to like laser chop off someone's gun from their weird alien arm. It was spooky and strange. I really liked the atmosphere of this game. Where I struggled with Delusion Out of Space is that so much of the game relied on you having to interact with different objects and environmental things, but I was finding triggering that really finicky. And so if you went up close to something, the menu didn't trigger. If you was too far away, it didn't know which one to trigger. And then you had to kind of line yourself up a bit. And I found that quite frustrating very quickly over time. So if it was a bit more generous with what was considered being locked onto an environmental object to trigger it, I think the flow of this game would be much stronger in the future, and therefore I would definitely be thinking, yep, anyone that likes a first-person atmospheric adventure shooter game, you can definitely dive in here, because the storyline, the atmosphere and the energy of this is on point. It just needs a little bit of tweaking with that gameplay flow. Talking of atmosphere, Floralis has it in spades because it's creepy as hell as you're playing as a little child trapped in some weird labyrinthian maze where nature and just sinister evil people seem to be combining and colluding to drag you under the stairs and kill you. The game reminds me a little bit of Little Nightmares. It also reminds me, probably because it's tiny little kids playing hide and seek and being creepy, of the PS2 game Rule of Rose a little bit too, if anyone remembers that. And yeah, this game just, it sends a little creepy shiver down your spine because it's got great sound design. The graphics have so much darkness and cool lighting effects to them. There's a bit where you have to prise open a fridge door and it's this cold clinical light just shines out. And then you see like a little kid in the corner that's just like going, hide and seek. And I was like, all right, I'm quitting. I don't like it. But alongside that, the puzzles were intricate too. And whilst usually I complain about games having floaty controls, oddly, having floaty controls and things feeling a bit ethereal and strange and off-kilter really suited the style for Floralis. So it bucks the trend in my I hate floaty controls in games general steer. So yeah, this one is creeping me out, but I really liked it. So this is going to be one of those games where I'll be playing it through squinty eyes when it comes out in the future. The final game on this list is Fight Life Vanguard, which is a turn-based RPG with strategic elements to it, because the game sees you picking up various different classes of characters and then taking them into mission battles. But the missions start off with a world map that has a fog of war over it. So you click on where you want your band of warriors to go, and then eventually they'll come across some enemies that then take you into hex grid based turn-based combat. Depending on the classes, depends on where you want to put your various different characters and how they're going to attack. So like your archer doesn't want to be too up close because they'll be killed off very quickly. But what I did find is that, and it's probably because of the slice of life of the game that we're playing, because it was just giving us a couple of missions to muck about with. And it seemed quite early in the game too. The melee classes didn't have too much differentiation between them, so I just used to like get them to gang up on various enemies and try and pile drive them where possible. But what I really liked about this is that overworld map then meant that some battles were really wide open and you had to think about being surrounded, and then another one saw you in quite a narrow corridor, and so it was very easy to have a lot of your enemies try and like overwhelm just one of your characters and just ignore all the rest and try and take down one at a time and be like, no. So I really enjoyed it from that perspective. And yeah, it scratched an itch of lots of different interesting elements, none of them unique, but well put together. And so Fight Life Vanguard is a nice way to round off this list of 10 demos, because largely I enjoyed playing all of these. And yeah, let me know down in the comments if there's any that particularly stood out to you that you'll probably wishlist when it gets round to doing so in the future. Quite a lot of these demos are available on Steam if you want them. And I hope to be judging a lot more in 2025, because I've been really enjoying it across this year where I can. Thanks for watching.